So, talking about the consumer and even the business owner, but probably more so the retail customer or just a consumer,
Yeah.
what shouldn't they do?
So there's a lot that they should consider in not doing. And the first thing that comes to mind is don't put checks in the mail, right? I mean, it seems like really like not at all, really not at all, if you can help it.
Right.
I know, there are times when you can't help it,
Yeah.
but really, again, 688 million in 6 months.
In today's episode, we'll explore the growing issue of check fraud and its broader implications with the landscape of financial scams. As fraud becomes more prevalent and sophisticated, it's essential for individuals and families and businesses to stay informed and take proactive steps to protect themselves. Today, we're joined by Scott Birrenkott, the Director of Legal Affairs of the Wisconsin Bankers Association. Scott brings valuable insights on how to safeguard against fraud and support those who may be vulnerable. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we are almost in 2025, and we're living in this digital age where digital banking is supposedly taking over. But here we are sitting with just huge increases in check fraud in terms of from a national. Do you have any statistics in terms of how much check fraud is actually happening in the United States or even in Wisconsin?
Yeah, actually, it's funny you mentioned because FinCEN just released a study. Now, this is specific to mail theft check fraud.
Okay.
Right. And so this is over a 6-month period where back in 2023, FinCEN issued a notice saying, hey, there's a huge uptick in mail fraud. Here's some indicators. Here's some red flags. Right. And during the 6-month period since they released that, they published a study with all of the SARs that were filed, right? Every BSA filing that they collected, and it amounted to 688 million.
Wow.
That's reported
Over
6 months period.
6-month period of time. Unbelievable. And basically, what has caused this? What do you think is the primary driver for this to be occurring?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Because as you said, in 2024 going into 2025, why check fraud?
Yeah.
Why is check fraud on the rise? And that's just it. Right. One of the elements I would say is that, in this day and age of technology, it's somewhat easier, right? It's not to say that there is no ACH fraud, right? And certainly not that there's no peer-to-peer fraud, right? Or other electronic types of fraud.
Yeah.
It's just that it's so much easier to do check fraud. And I think part of it too is we started seeing this around the time of the pandemic. And for whatever reason, the conditions were around that time, we started to see this mail theft. And I think the fraudsters started to see, hey, this is a lot easier than trying to evade all of these technological blocks that we have to encounter in other areas.
Sure.
That it's as simple as going in those blue boxes and stealing the mail, going off the back of a truck, stealing it, going into somebody's mailbox and taking
The
it.
red flag.
Exactly. And once they have that, washing the check or creating a fictitious check, creating a fictitious account for a fictitious business. And I think it is just the fact that it is that paper check and there is a little bit more ease in being able to do that. Information is available too, and that's a technological channel that enhances, unfortunately, the ability to be able to do check fraud, in that, I can go out there and obtain information, be it to create a fictitious ID. Sometimes we have, semi-fictitious IDs. That's a combination of some true elements and others that aren't, to create this person that has some things that might be able to bypass layers of security. Create that account and then start writing checks on it.
Wow. So talking about the consumer and even the business owner, but probably more so the retail customer or just a consumer.
Yeah.
What shouldn't they do?
So there's a lot that they should consider in not doing. And the first thing that comes to mind is don't put checks in the mail, right? I mean, it seems like really like not at all, really, not at all, if you can help it.
Right.
I know, there are times when you can't help it.
Yeah.
But really, again, $688 million in 6 months.
I guess I'll have to say, okay, looking at the typical check writer demographically, maybe not the most technologically advanced, maybe just, some people don't change. I mean, we still have people coming in wanting us to help them balance their registers, their check registers. So let's just say that not to write checks maybe off the board.
Yeah, yes.
What are some of the things they should absolutely not do? So again, I think you're absolutely right. First option is don't write checks and figure out different ways. But what are some of the
it's
other?
not practical, right?
Yeah.
So if we're going to write checks, I think in no particular order, just kind of as they come to me, I'm getting a birthday check.
Sure.
Hey, did you get that? Right? Along those lines, don't make it obvious that there's a check in the mail. I was talking to some of our security officers, and they say, I can spot any envelope and know there's a check in there.
Really?
Right? I mean, if there's a sticker on it, happy birthday, writer smiley face, or it looks like it's coming from grandpa and grandma, or it's, colorful on the envelope, kind of how it looks. If the fraudsters see, hey, this is likely to have a check in it, that's going to be an avenue of what they're looking for.
Yeah. And obviously, I think we talked the two things. I think you mentioned the blue boxes.
Yep.
Those are not immune. Just because there's a blue box that says United States Postal Service on it doesn't make it immune from, because I believe you probably know, well, you know better than I, they are able to access those. They actually have access to those types of things.
Unfortunately, yes. And so fraudsters are able to get the keys to access that box. And there's actually, the post office is aware, but there's an issue where sometimes employees are engaged by the fraudsters, right? Involved in this, and they have access to those blue boxes. So there is risk there. So, even if you're going to have to use a blue box, make sure you know where it is. That it's in an area that is secure and safe.
Okay.
I think too, there are things, it's hard to focus on the what not to do, but those are a lot of them, right? When it comes to the mail.
And absolutely, the red flag out in front of your house is like just an invitation for somebody to drive through, right?
I think too, don't leave your checkbook lying around, right? And some of these might seem obvious, but even around your house, right? Or if you're taking it out, especially if you're a business, know who has access to your checkbooks. Even for businesses too, payroll checks. One of our security officers was telling me a story about how they're working with one of their business customers that do payroll, and they write all these checks, they put them in an envelope, and they throw them on the lunchroom table. And they leave them there for the employees to come and get.
Okay.
Don't do that.
Seems pretty, probably a pretty good idea.
Yep.
Sounds very, casual, but probably not the best
Right.
idea. Yeah. Okay. And then, so we talked about the mailboxes. We talked about don't leave checks just sitting around, which makes a lot of sense. Okay. Now let's talk about what are some things as a good follow-up you're going to write checks. You're taking all the preventative measures. What are some good things to do? And I think you mentioned one of them is just follow up with the phone call with somebody. If you're doing that, obviously if you're writing a check to We Energies, there are having access to your bank too, in terms of monitoring your checking account. Is that something that you would encourage people to do?
Absolutely. So just as there are things that you don't want to do, there are lots of proactive things that you can do. And this is the biggest one. If I had to give one takeaway to everyone, consumer, commercial, everyone will check your statements. Check your statements regularly. Daily if you can, even more weekly if you can't, right? But the more you check your statements, you check your online, right? Banks these days, tons of ways to access and check it. I could pull up my phone and check it. Online, if using your PC or the statements that are regularly mailed to you, but the more often you check that. Yeah. And then obviously the second part is if you notice any irregular activity, tell your bank as soon as possible.
Right.
The sooner you're able to spot any irregular activity, any potentially unauthorized activity, and let your bank know, the more likely they're able to do something about it. I'd say that is the big one.
Sure.
Obviously, work with your bank too to understand any additional fraud protection tools that they have or services that they have available for you, because they're going to have tips too,
Right.
depending on the nature of your account relationship with them, right? And if you are a commercial customer and you have those accounts, so that they know who's authorized, right? Keep that information up to date so that they know who's on the account, they know who to contact, they know who to call if there's a question. Because if there is some compromise, right? If I'm a commercial customer of yours and I have a employee who has an email compromise that's authorized on that account, so that you can see that and say, hey, Scott, we're noticing some strange activity. Did you authorize this? Can you check in on this? So to be able to have those lines of communication is very important too.
Do you have any real life examples you can provide that you've experienced for, that you've heard about?
Yeah, I do. And so actually, as I was telling you, before we started, just this morning, I'm liaison to the WBA Financial Crimes Committee. And so we had a meeting this morning, just as chance would have it. And so you can imagine we had a room full of security officers across Wisconsin came together. And part of what we talk about is common fraud schemes that they're seeing. And so I asked them, what are some that you're seeing? And there's quite a few. I wrote some of them down here.
Yep.
So the first one that was shared, and I just thought this one was good, right? To kind of show the impact and how this can affect anyone. And this is consumer. But someone goes to a dog park and they leave their wallet, they leave their phone, they leave, information within the car. They come back and they see the window smashed. And so somebody has all that personal identifying information and they're able to, access their account and commit fraud.
Yeah.
And even higher risk if there's checkbook, right?
Yeah.
So, I think, again, when that is out, that personal information, that's when the risk becomes heightened.
Gotcha.
On the commercial side, there's quite a few. We talked a lot about mail fraud. But I think another one to illustrate is social engineering.
Okay.
And so you might think, all right, I'm confident with my checks. I'm confident when I'm writing them. I'm confident when I'm sending them out. But who is authorized on that account, right? And if their email is compromised, and so me as a business owner, I have an employee whose email is compromised, and they now have access to this. They could try to add somebody else on the account to write checks. They could get access to information to be able to create checks. Another example I heard on the commercial side is, let's say I've got a commercial entity name and I'm legitimate in Wisconsin. Somebody takes that, they go out on my website, they get some information about my business, and they go and actually file a legal entity, maybe in Illinois or another state, to actually create this entity under my name to represent as me. And they start writing checks off of accounts that they're out there creating. And it's not associated with me, but it's using this legitimate information, right? And misrepresenting and committing fraud under my name.
Yeah.
I think, another good one is just to watch out for those text messages, those calls you get, somebody who's impersonating someone. Microsoft alerts is a big one that the group shared with me right now. And one of the real life examples was a banker shared that just the other day they had 4 in one day where customers' unauthorized items were coming out of their account. And the reason was because they clicked on a pop-up that was illegitimate. They got access to their bank account, right? And start writing items off of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unbelievable, and how quickly it can turn too. Any other? What are some of the resources that people could go to? I know the Wisconsin Bankers Association may have some resources for consumers. Other resources that you could recommend, or websites that possibly would be helpful. Obviously, the equitablebank.com would be one of them.
Absolutely, yes. I think that is a great one. Right, go to your bank, see what resources they have available to you, because you have your relationship with them as their customer. They're going to know the tools. They're going to know your situation. They're going to be in the best position to work with you and know how to help you protect your account, right? Get these transactions done properly and to the party they're supposed to go to. In terms of additional resources, WBA does have some consumer-facing resources. As a trade association, our resources are geared toward bankers.
Right.
So, certainly bankers will find a lot of resources there, but that we have actually a consumer-facing page that is dedicated to providing resources for just this type of thing. And it's been updated somewhat recently, where our communications team works to, gather this information from bankers, what we're hearing, what the common fraud trends are, and ways to protect yourself.
Right.
And so these are put up in nice one-pagers, in infographics. They've got tips, they've got suggestions, recommendations, but would highly recommend checking that out.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap things up, I think ultimately at the end of the day, writing checks and fraud in general, check fraud in general, is basically should be the same thing as if you're leaving your house, you lock your doors. Basically, you should be, even if you have a Ring system now where you're monitoring what's going on at your home pretty much 24/7, similar to that in consumers who are writing checks, continuing to write checks. First, I think you suggested don't write checks if you don't have to. And there's many options that allows you to do that. But if that's not an option, then make sure you're monitoring it on a day-to-day basis, which you can do through alerts that you have through your online banking. If you don't have online banking access, you can still do it through a mobile banking. Most people still do have smartphones, correct? And most can get mobile banking on their phone and set up alerts, some unusual dollar amounts probably if I don't write checks over $500, so set it at a level that's probably going to be outside of your norm. Any other suggestions you may have?
Yeah. I know it sounds silly, right? It's like, oh, you don't want your house broken into? Don't leave your house. You have to lock it, right? Don't write checks.
Write checks, sure.
So other steps, I agree. Using those tools that are available to you, positive pay is a big one, right? And that's the one that I hear thrown around a lot as, hey, this is one of the best tools that bankers are going to have available. It's going to come in different shapes and sizes and different forms, right? Depending on what your bank has available to you. But I think that's a big one.
It's an insurance policy. The number of people we have they have to experience something bad happening before they do it is usually the trigger that gets them to do it, unfortunately, because nobody wants to spend extra money if they don't think they need it until they need it.
Right.
But I'm telling you, it's an insurance policy that everybody should have, especially if you're writing checks to employees, checks to vendor, all of those types of things. It's wildly necessary. And I know it's just difficult to get people to pull the trigger until they experience something bad.
And it's relatively simple most of the time. I know it's sometimes like seems inconvenient, right? I really have to approve this every time, but I promise it's worth it for anyone who's thinking about that and saying, Josh, do I really need it? Again, think about that figure, that 688 million figure. And I say, if you're a business and you're writing checks, and again, you're sending them off to whoever you're buying and selling from and working with, it's only a matter of time before a check gets intercepted or lifted off the back of a mail truck or pulled out of one of those blue boxes. And that positive pay, right, catching it, or whatever other services, when you get that call from the banker that says, hey, did you really write this check out for this payment of materials or for this lumber or whatever, or this construction? Double check. Really do double check. Because another story that I was shared with was that they made that call and they said, oh, yeah, we're pretty sure that was for a construction project that we had. And then it turned out that was true, but it was altered. The number was altered. Yeah. And so double check those calls, use those services, right? Positive pay is a good one, but ask your bank what other services they have, what fraud protection services, what treasury management services. And I think you even mentioned consider what insurance as a business that you have too, should this happen.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to add today, Scott?
I think I would just reiterate again the importance of checking your statement. You know, me personally, I like to say that because if you see it, then there's a lot of time where the bank can intervene and do something about it. The sooner, the better. The sooner you alert your bank. Don't be afraid to have those conversations. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's what bankers are there for, to work work with you on. I'd say if any bankers are listening too, that I would encourage you to also not be afraid to ask questions, right? If you see something strange, give your customer a call, give your business customer a call and say, hey, did you do this? I noticed a strange email coming in from you. Did you really approve this? Was this dollar amount really correct? Don't be afraid to ask questions. That communication is really important in combating fraud.
Yeah, that's very well said. Scott Birrenkott, the Director of Legal Affairs at the Wisconsin Bankers Association. Thanks for joining us on the Smart Start podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Tom.